just give us the most basic rundown that you possibly can of what the situation is like right now in South Africa for the white European descendants that are living there.
Very briefly, South Africa held universal elections for the first time on the 27th of April 1994. So we've had 23 years of democracy. During that period, the crime rate has skyrocketed in South Africa. We are sometimes referred to as the rape capital of the world. Our murder rate is astonishingly high, and particularly the rape and murder of white people on farms, that is to say farmers, is beyond most people's comprehension. To illustrate the point for you, South Africa is a violent society, so it's to be expected that South African policemen, that they're attacked often and they die often. The rate of murder of South African policemen is amongst the very highest in the whole world. But it is just more than twice as dangerous to be a South African farmer. Now that to most people is incredible. It's a statistic that you almost don't expect people to believe because it's not believable. But it's a fact that the murder of white farmers in South Africa is double the rate of murder of policemen, which indicates for you how severe things are on a crime level. Coupled with that, the state has deteriorated drastically. We have a government and a state apparatus that is saturated with incompetence and unwillingness, if you like, with the result that the country is crumbling, and it's now reached the point where there is a crescendo of calls from the populist demagogues in South Africa for the expropriation without compensation of all white property. For example, the leader of the party that you can see, the people wearing red, those people belong to a party called the Economic Freedom Fighters. They're a party with millions and millions of support. And the leader of that party said on the 7th of November last year in the town of Newcastle in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, I am not calling for the slaughter of all whites yet. 2 days later, his right-hand man said that if we do not get all white land expropriated without compensation before the 3rd of August, are we going to have to resort to slaughtering all the whites? And well, let me put it to you this way. I have to choose my words carefully, Henrik, but a very, very, very senior traditional leader, that is to say black traditional leader of a kingdom in South Africa said to me, in your culture, those statements could mean anything. In my culture, they mean only one thing. They mean, I want you to slaughter all of the whites. We are going to have a violent revolution. Get ready and in the starting blocks. If you look at the statistics, you can see that shortly after the 1994 elections, once people realized that the government would condone or tolerate murder and rape in a way that hadn't previously been tolerated, they found their self-confidence, and they set about it with greater eagerness. And you can see in the statistics a steady upward trend to levels that would not be accepted anywhere else in the world. Dr. Gregory Stanton of Genocide Watch in Washington, D.C., who, by the way, is a noted liberal who was an anti-apartheid activist, in other words, not a natural ally of conservatives such as ourselves. Dr. Gregory Stanton visited South Africa in 2012, and following that visit, there are two things worth mentioning. Firstly, he placed white South Africans, all white South Africans, in the final phase of his measuring tool before all-out genocide. And even we were astonished to hear that. And he explained how the system works. And he said, I genuinely believe that you are being set up for a genocide. Now, Dr. Gregory Stanton of Genocide Watch in Washington, D.C., is the man who predicted the Rwanda genocide a year before it happened, but a year in advance. In other words, he wasn't saying 12 months prior that it's going to happen tomorrow. He was saying, this thing is going to happen in about a year's time. And it did. So he's an acknowledged expert. And he's saying that we are on the cusp of a genocide. Furthermore, he said in an interview shortly after his visit, the worst thing about what I've seen is that it's clear to me that this is being orchestrated. In other words, that the murder of white people by black people, which has now reached, and I'm not speaking of the farms, I'm speaking generally, of the whites in the population of about 4.6 to 4.8 million. Nobody's sure because our Department of Statistics is not mathematically competent. And it's well known that they sort of mess it up every time. But between 4.6 to 4.8 million white people is just past the 74,000 mark. I spoke to an American scholar 2 weeks ago who said that he's positive that the number is closer to 120,000. Now, nobody knows the correct number because some years ago, the Minister of Safety and Security, that is to say police, justice, jails, the correctional system, the penitentiaries and so on, stood up in Parliament following a barrage of criticism of how the government is handling crime. Yes, the people who were complaining were necessarily white newspapers or predominantly white newspapers and political observers and so on. He said, if people don't like the crime in South Africa, they should leave. Now, this is the attitude of the government. Shortly after that, the government adopted a policy of not releasing statistics by race. In other words, there's no way to know how many people have been murdered. We know for certain that it's a minimum of 74,000. That is to say, white people murdered by black people. And as I say, there's an American scholar who presented, certainly to me, a very persuasive argument that it's closer to 125,000.
Experience tranquility.
This will heal you.
The cycle begins anew.
Play of the game.
This tranquility.